to achieve any kind of positive impact in the climate space, we need large-scale adoption, we need large-scale behavior change.
You invest at the intersection of social and climate issues. What does that look like in practice? What are the type of companies that you're financing?
We actually want to change systems. We need to bring lots of different types of people along on the journey.
Hello and welcome to VCO2, the podcast that helps you become a smarter impact investor and a better climate tech entrepreneur. Today, we're joined by Alina Klarner, the general partner at Impact Shakers, a fund, an accelerator, and an overall ecosystem that connects, develop, and invest in diverse funders building impact companies. In today's episode, we'll discuss the connection between climate and social challenges and explain why investing in diverse funders is critical for impactful solutions. Before we start, don't forget to leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to the YouTube channel, or give us a 5-star review and a follow on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. This episode is sponsored by Buresol, an AI-driven energy company transforming how businesses store, manage, and consume energy. Buresol's energy as a service model makes clean energy adoption seamless, helping industrial and SME achieve energy autonomy, cost optimization, and sustainability without any upfront investment. They are now expanding in France and Europe, and they are launching their first commercial projects. So if you want to learn more, you can find the link to their website in the description of this episode, or you can reach out to their CEO, Felipe Ariola. Back to this episode. I was looking up your profile and you've done a lot of different finance jobs. And today you decided to focus on climate and social entrepreneurs. Why is it the case? Why did you decide to focus on that specific niche?
Very happy to be here, first of all. Thank you for having me. Very much looking forward to the conversation. Maybe I'll tell you a little bit about sort of my background and my journey, and then I think it will become clear quite quickly. So I was first advising PE and then worked in PE, and I always loved the work, but I was really getting to a point where I was missing a diverse set of people around me. And back then also ESG wasn't, not even speaking of impact, but even ESG wasn't a topic that was being taken seriously. So I was kind of put in front of a choice to either try to slowly and painfully change things from the inside or go and do something about it myself. And because I'm not the most patient person, I decided to go and do something. So I started to angel invest, predominantly initially in female impact entrepreneurs. And sort of my thesis as an angel was to invest in the things that I wanted to see in my own life. Like invested in a company called Byway that does flight-free travel. I invested in a company called Nips, etc., who upcycles juice pulp into the tastiest granola, with the goal of eliminating this concept of food waste. And then I sort of started seeing that there was so many phenomenal founders building really meaningful businesses and using entrepreneurship as a tool for driving positive change, whilst also building a commercially very valid business. So through this, I continued to build my ecosystem, build my network, and through this, I met my now business partner Yoncha, who had set up Impact Shakers back in 2018 with the goal of supporting diverse entrepreneurs building impact startups. And she had started with programs and ecosystem building. And when we met back in 2021, we clicked immediately because we both deeply believed in impact entrepreneurship as a way of solving some of these complex and urgent problems. But we both agreed that more funding is needed. So we spent about a year co-founder dating, as we call it now, figuring out what we want to do, how we want to work together, looking at hundreds of companies together, and then decided to join forces in 2022, setting up our first vehicle back then, our microfund. And then in 2024, we launched our first impact VC fund with a focus on diverse founders building in climate and inclusion tech.
Yeah, I love the story. I think it makes a lot of sense. But I'm curious, what does it take to be successful in a co-founder date? Is that something very usual? What does it mean actually? How does it look like in practice to, co-founder dates?
Yeah, so we spent a lot. We started with a list of questions. We actually had a list of questions of just things that you will come across in your day-to-day life all the time. How you handle conflict, how you like to work, what is important to you, whether you're looking for work-life balance or whether there are other things that you wanna that are more important to you, what success looks like. All of these things that I think often are implied but not necessarily talked about. So we had some very deep conversations around this, which also take a bit of time, hence us spending quite a bit of time getting to know each other. But then also just working together, actually seeing what it feels like and yeah, testing each other in that way.
No, that makes a lot of sense for sure. I think it's very important because co-founder conflicts seems to be one of the reasons why startup or like companies fail a lot. So I think it makes a lot of sense to take a lot of time and to make sure that everything is aligned before actually jumping in. Something else I'm a bit curious about, but like you seems to be caring a lot about climate and social issues. Did you had a moment in your life when you realized, okay, like I need to do something about these problems? Because those problems are very complex and they exist, but some people just seems to not care at all.
I think it was more of a process. There wasn't like one pivotal moment where I suddenly realized that this was a thing. It was just sort of a series of events and one thing after the other that really just kept building up, and the anxiety kept building up. And so at some point there was a point where I just had to do something also for my own mental well-being.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's often how it starts, with a bit of anxiety about these issues, but at least it forces people to move and take actions, which in your case, you did. Um, well, going back to your story, so you started this fund, Impact Shakers. You invest at the intersection of social and climate issues. What does that look like in practice? What are the type of companies that you're financing?
Yeah, maybe the easiest way to answer the question is to give you a couple of examples of the companies that we've invested in. So there is a Belgian business called Bitter Green, which basically provides a platform that allows people in urban environments to assess climate risk. So risk of flooding, overheating, biodiversity loss, air pollution, and then a scenario modeling tool to look at how you can use nature-based tools to create resilience for these urban areas. So on the face of it, it's a very climate-heavy tool, but really what it does is create better living spaces for people in urban areas, right? And if we think about how much of the population lives in these urban areas, and that number is only increasing, actually for society, this becomes increasingly important. So this is one of the examples. And the other one that I would maybe talk about is the Circular Library Network, which is an Icelandic business that we invested in recently. And essentially, what Anna from the Circular Library Network has built is the infrastructure to turn any set of lockers into a sharing library. So she provides the hardware, the software to allow the borrowing, and then also the software to build a community around this. And on the one hand, this goes to the fact that a drill on average only gets used for 13 minutes in its life, and we should all do a lot more sharing to reduce our footprints. But on the other hand, it also makes these tools much more accessible. If you think about people that can't afford to buy everything new, it creates community around this. So it's a sort of climate tool on the face of it, but it has this massive social impact that maybe in how it gets used and adopted is even more important.
I love the two companies you mentioned. I think it makes a lot of sense in how you kind of try to align climate and social together. Is there an economic thesis behind it as well? Like, is there a way for you that you see that those two components coming together as being more resilient, maybe, or stronger, and potentially bringing more returns as a fund as well?
Definitely. So I think there are many different aspects to this. So I'll dive into a few, and then you can see which one you find most interesting. But I think climate and social aspects go hand in hand, right? If we think about some of the most complex issues like waste, like climate change, CO2 reduction, none of those can be solved by just the climate technology, right? You need a degree of behavior change. You need the people with the right skills and training. You need the data to support it all. So to actually just focus on a very niche part of it, it kind of ignores the system that everything operates in. So this is the approach that we take, that we say, actually, we need to look at lots of different parts in the system, and then identify the levers where we can actually make a change and bring them together, and help these companies build businesses that, yes, are more resilient, that also can basically create more buy-in and bring more people along on the journey, right? Because we need to achieve any kind of positive impact in the climate space. We need large scale adoption. We need large scale behavior change. So there are so many things where we need to bring people along on this journey. Um, that makes it much more sensible, I think, to look at both aspects.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting how much of a behavior change we need because like a lot of these great tools that we are currently creating are useless if no one else just actually using them and adopting them in their practice and in their business or in their day-to-day life. Which I understand how that could come together with like the social aspect and same for the business that you mentioned earlier, which is like the community aspect of it. I think makes it even stronger because that's a huge defense against potential other actors that would try to integrate the space, which is very interesting.
Maybe just one more thing. I think it also needs to be fun, right? Like, one of our values is joy and bringing joy to us, because when we talk about behavior change, it sounds a little bit like, oh, stop eating meat, be a good corporate citizen, all of these kind of things. But I think there also needs to be some joy in this, right? Some things that people want to adopt because it makes their lives better, more joyful, easier. So I think there is also a lot of that positive aspect in the social aspect, in the behavior change aspect. And one of the companies that we invested in is a German business called Mercado. I don't know whether you've come across it, but it's basically a platform for secondhand items. Let's say you're looking for a green cap. So you Google green cap, and Mercado will come up with all of the alternatives, secondhand alternatives, from all of the secondhand platforms that are out there, and then you can easily go and get your items secondhand. So it's something that basically quite seamlessly plugs into something that we all do relatively frequently, depending on the person, right? And makes it easier, removes some of the friction. So I think there are also parts of this, and it only works if it actually makes people's lives a bit easier, a bit more fun.
Yeah, and some of those things are really fun. I mean, one thing I'm trying to do as much as I can is just taking the bike to go to work or any places, which is much better than taking the car or anything. And to be honest, like you sometimes have like beautiful rides in the sun, and that makes you think that you know not only is a climate action, but also like for your mental health and like other things. I think it helps a lot. So for sure, I think it's about making it fun rather than restricting yourself. Because if you have frustration, I don't know if it will work in the long term. Um, for a startup that is trying to work in the climate space, so trying to create a climate tech company, for example, how do you embed the social impact by default in your business model? Like, how do you make sure that this is part of your business?
I think it starts, at least in the businesses that we work with, it starts with the founder. So very often they have a deeply personal mission for driving the change that they are building towards with their startups. And that obviously seeps through into the culture of the business, into the team, into how they go about their business. And then I think in the context of how they run their business, it needs to be in everything. It needs to be in your go to market, and how you think about building your product, and how you interact with your team, and what you have in your legal documents. So I think this is really more of a way of being and doing things than it is any specific action that you have to take. And if you do this, then you will have positive social impact. It's also about building diverse and inclusive teams, right? Because a lot of these things we may have blind spots on, but once we start bringing all these diverse perspectives together and actually give them a voice and listen to them and work together and collaborate, all of a sudden there's all these perspectives that on the one hand bring insights, but on the other hand also bring innovation.
So what's actually your investment criteria? Like when you look at a company that comes to you, like what are some of the filtering criteria you used from, all of the sourcing you have, which is probably tons of company reaching out to all the way down to like the companies you invest in?
So we, surprise, surprise, invest in diverse teams. So this can be diverse in terms of gender, people of color, people with migration background, LGBTQ plus, disability, often an intersection of of these. So it's more of an and than an or. At the pre-seed seed stage, building in climate tech or inclusion tech, and based in Europe and the UK. And then we have certain principles that we like to see in these companies in terms of how the founders approach it, how the business is being built, the type of solution. So one important one is that we're looking for systemic solutions rather than sticking plasters. So having a business that does fast fashion and then plants some trees, not going to cut it for us. Equally, we look for businesses that have thought through the whole value chain very, very deeply. And one of the example that I found interesting that we looked at was a business that was coming up with a vegan alternative to seafood. Um, and so the sort of the environmental footprint at first sight of that was very clear, but the supply chain had been built in a way that it basically had to be shipped all across Europe to get to the initial from the production facilities to the initial customers, which then in turn itself creates an enormous footprint, right? So it's thinking through. It's people that think through all of the details of how things work and have a lot of integrity in how they go about this. And we've actually put together an overview of our impact principles, so maybe we can link to this afterwards as well.
Yeah, for sure. I'll link to that in the description. When you say about when you talk about thinking through the entire system, do you have tools that you use? For example, I'll mention LCAs, but is there anything that you use to try and understand whether or not this company has an overall positive impact? Because as you said, for example, for that seafood company, well, on paper, at first sight, it looks really great. But as you said, when look a layer below, then you start to understand that maybe it's not that much of a great company.
Yes, so there are some qualitative, some quantitative processes that we go through. One of the tools that we use both in the initial assessment as well as then during the DD and working with the companies is called Vested Impact. It was built by a very impressive woman who used to manage the $8 billion budget of the UN Peace Corps. So she really knows impact, and basically developed this tool that draws on hundreds of millions of data points, both from organizations like the World Bank, OECD, the UN, but then also scientific research of what the causal links are, what creates impact, what doesn't, and then generates an impact rating against the 17 UN SDGs, but then also an overall rating, positive, negative impact, it flags risks. So this is one of the sort of gatekeepers that we have in the process that we look at, and it often brings up things especially on the risk side that you might not necessarily initially think about, right? But it's also one of the reasons why for every software company that we invest in, we agree with the companies to put in place a net zero strategy, because even if you don't have a physical footprint in what you do, you will have servers. And the more AI you use, the more your footprint sort of rises there, right? So it's really understanding that. And it's also spending a lot of time with the founders, both during the DD and then as we work with them. Our head of impact and systems change, Suzanne, does a lot of work with the businesses. And we're big fans of actually trying to understand how the business works and how we can build impact into all of the different parts, right? So if you want to measure impact, what does your product need to look like? What data does it need to capture? On the go-to-market, are there specific customers that you will accept or won't accept? In your team, what do you have in place in terms of the diversity and the inclusion? How do you treat your team? Who has what say in what? How do you get people to collaborate and talk to each other? So that basically is built into an impact roadmap that we help the businesses work through in our accelerator program, and beyond as well. But it's a very important part of it, because with the early stage businesses, it's very hard to pick one metric and say this is it, right? This is going to tell us how we do impact. It is much more complex, and it's a process. And our ambition is to help build businesses where the impact is so deeply ingrained in the business that whoever comes after us as investors, as owners, as whatever, if you take out the impact, you destroy the business.
Are you scared about other people taking over businesses and actually, reducing the impact? Are you scared of that?
I would say it's a risk, but I wouldn't say scared, because the businesses that we choose are businesses that inherently have a lockstep business model, right? And then all the work that we do is to embed this even more deeply.
Yeah, very interesting. And I love how you think about it, like from pre-investment, really looking at all of the aspect of the company, to post-investment, supporting them in that journey and making sure that they are very resilient in their impact. I think it's an interesting concept. Well, I guess we can move to the next section of this episode, which is more about your role as a venture capitalist in those companies. I guess one of the things you try to do, and I was reading about that before this episode, is like you try to be the connector among all of the actors, so the startups, the policymakers, the corporates, investors. Why do you do that? Like, why is it important to connect all of that ecosystem?
Yeah, very good question, very good research. Impact Shakers indeed is an impact ecosystem, and this is also how we have built everything that we built based on this ecosystem. Because one of the big ideas that we have is that collaboration is systems change, and if we actually want to change systems, we need to bring lots of different types of people along on the journey. And so a lot of the work that we do is to bring people together. And this can be things like working with accelerators and other impact investors to funnel more capital to diverse founders building and scaling impact solutions. We're currently doing a series of roundtables with people that are somehow working in systems change to explore what people are doing, what is working, to learn from each other, to share frameworks, experiences, things that haven't worked. So I think this collaboration piece is really, really crucial, and actually solving something as complex as climate change or social inequities. Um, because the idea is that we embrace complexity, and no one person can solve any of this individually. So actually, by bringing people together and adopting this mindset of collaboration, we can make some serious change.
Yeah, and we're all concerned by this issue. I think it's the first time that businesses try to address a challenge that is really worldwide. You know, like we've been saying to startups, like you need to go global, but like for climate tech companies, for example, like the problem is really worldwide. There is not part of the world that's not going to be concerned by climate change. So I think it's very interesting how you try to connect all of these actors. Um, do you also feel like you have a role in making sure that, every founder, no matter their past and background, has access to capital and resources to build companies? Is that part of your role as well?
To an extent, yeah. Yeah. So we've done in the past, we've done a lot of programs. We are maybe it's worth mentioning the microfund as well. We have a microfund that acts as a friends and family vehicle. That's a community of people that invest together. And one of the mandates of this is to invest in founders that don't necessarily have friends and family that can put a few thousands or tens of thousands of euros on the table for very, very early stage things. So this is one of the ways in which we step in. The other thing is also thinking about how founders find investors and vice versa, right? So trying to rethink pipeline and how we connect with each other in an industry that is still, I think, very much dominated by warm introductions. How we can open this up a little bit and actually give founders access through pitching competitions, through calls, through um, the network that we have, and letting them tap into this. And this is before the initial connection or introduction to us, but this then also continues with our work with them, access to sort of raising future rounds and access to the investor network and all of that.
And how can you change that? Because it's really like a systemic change within the VC industry that you're going after.
Good question. We're working on it. A lot of it, I think, is through finding people that are value aligned, that also believe. And if we're talking about diverse founders, I think we shouldn't forget that the percentage of funding going to diverse teams is still abysmally low. It's 2% going to all female teams. If it's a good year, it's 3%. If it's a bad year, it's 1%. When depending on the country, the proportion of female founders is somewhere between 20 and 50%, right? So this is a market, a part of the market that is so tragically underfunded that no, there is no need to compete, right? We don't think about winning deals. We think about finding amazing founders that for one reason or another have not raised or are looking to raise, and working with the right people to actually make them the success that they should be and that they can be.
Do you sometimes proactively reach out to companies that you think are great companies but haven't raised money because of whatever reason?
We do a lot of research as well. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen our LinkedIn page, but anyone who follows us on LinkedIn, we do um, a weekly post on companies to watch, where we feature diverse impact founders in different areas, different sectors. So there is a lot of research that goes into that. And the team do a phenomenal job on that. And yeah, same for sort of specific topics that we're interested in, or things that maybe we've come across through the network.
Yeah, I highly recommend checking out the LinkedIn page because I think it's one of the books I really like reading because there's a lot of like weekly roundup or like weekly actions that companies can take or weekly program that companies can have access to. So it's a really great resource. Definitely appreciate the content. But going back to your role as an investor, if I'm a VC and I'm not currently investing in social and climate companies, what would be your advice for me to try and do more of that, to at least take a step in the right direction?
Go invest with us.
Seems easy.
Yeah, I think it's none of this is sort of an easy solution, right? I think again, it starts with a diverse and inclusive team. It starts with looking at your pipeline and where you find your deals. And then I think it also starts with letting go of some of these preconceptions that impact somehow means or necessarily means a sacrifice on returns, or any of these sort of myths that are out there still way too much. If we're looking at things like climate tech and the problems we're solving, the markets we're addressing, these are VC type markets, right? So I think maybe also taking an honest look at some of the preconceptions and checking whether they're still true.
Yeah, I mean, just think about energy for a second. Like energy is probably one of the biggest market in the world, right?
Exactly, and it's a massive problem for basically all of the population, right, of the world. Like this is, yeah, it's an enormous sector with enormous potential as well. And again, here, this is not just the energy infrastructure; it's the data around it, it's the training and the jobs for people who maintain it, who build it. It's all of these different aspects.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think we have enough encouraging policies to invest in climate and social companies? Because one thing I was reflecting on is like, it's weird that only VCs that are trying to do good. So I'm going to talk about Article 9 VC fund. It's weird that those are the only people that need to actually do impact reporting. It feels like it's almost the other way around, right? It's like you're not encouraging people to do it, but rather punishing people that are already on that journey. Like, what's your take on that?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I love that way of looking at it. I think the Article 8, Article 9 definitions maybe weren't as necessarily designed um, to actually assess impact. I'm not sure that that's helpful. I think some people still see them as a good signal, whether you're committed or not. In the early stage space, I think there was also a question of whether and there are some very different opinions on this, whether it's actually worth for the startup spending the time on doing the reporting for this as well that you need to do. But I think there are many different things that also sort of policymakers, governments, etc., can do that are hugely positive. So, if you think about the UK, for example, the dormant asset programs that have been in place, where actually some of these dormant assets go into funds that specifically invest with social or environmental impact in mind. Other things could be investment quotas for some of the biggest pots of money, right? If you're thinking about insurance providers or pensions, they need to think decades into the future. So that would seem like a no-brainer, but yet it's one of the slowest sectors to move and to adapt in this. And then actually regulation that helps innovation. And I think there is a bit of a middle ground still to be found, where it's not regulation for the sake of regulation that then rather kills small businesses that are trying to grow than actually helping them. But that gives enough of an incentive for people to actually get started on some of this.
Yeah, for sure. Some of them that we have in France are really interesting. Where, for example, as an investor, like as a private investor, you can get um, taxes reduction because you invest in a company that's innovating. I think that's a very interesting way of like pushing people to invest into this type of companies. And if people want to learn more about like impact reporting for startups, highly recommend an episode I've done with Heidi Lindwall from Pale Blue Dot. She has a very strong point of view on that. And another episode, which is almost the opposite, which is with Benedict from Planet A Venture, which is a life cycle analyst. Those are almost the two opposite end of the spectrum, which is very interesting to observe how different VC firms think about this topic. Well, I guess the next section of this episode is about the future. I love to give you a crystal ball and tell me, what does the future of investing in diverse and inclusive climate solution look like for you?
So I love that you're also asking about the inclusion part of it, because I think that is really important. Um, I think I would love to see more integration of the social and the climate aspects, just embracing the complexity of it and recognizing the complexity of it. I would love to see more collaboration of people actually co-investing because if we're thinking about it big picture, right, to reach the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and we can argue whether that's enough or not. We need 4.5 trillion to be invested annually. At the moment, the impact investing market stands at 1.2 trillion, somewhere between 1.2 and 1.5, depending on which numbers we're talking about and we believe. There is still so much scope and so much space to actually work together to bring more funding into the space, to figure out ways how we can get solutions also through the capital ladder, not just at the early stages, but then also bridging the gap to the much later stage funding that sometimes can be available. So more collaboration across the various ecosystems, even. And then the final thing is more systemic investing. So actually thinking about, rather than just thinking about the point solutions, thinking about one, what else do we need to make these solutions successful? And then experimenting, figuring out ways to invest in things actually that can actually drive systemic change meaningfully.
Yeah, and I love that you were a private equity investor before because you know a bit of that, later stage financing, which is also very difficult for companies. Because I mean, when you said the number, like we're talking in trillions, so like this is not VC money, right? Like we need to have more money later as well. So very interesting. Well, I guess a new section we have in this episode is question from a prior guest. So you received a question from one of my guests, which is Olivier from Wind Capital. I don't know if you know Wind Capital, a fund in France that's quite recent. I'll share the question with you now and I'll let you answer. Question for her.
Yeah, Alina, I understand that you have a very unique position in factoring both social challenges and environmental difficulties into your investment strategy. So my question to you would be, how in your investment strategy do you include the social question into the investment decisions that obviously promote better sustainable practices?
Great. I guess we talked a little bit about it already, but I'll let you answer.
Yeah, I think we talked about lots of aspects of it. Maybe one thing to add is also thinking about the end beneficiaries of the solution, right? So one of the things that we um, have stayed away from are solutions that are climate tech, but that build for a very privileged part of the population. So if you're thinking about, I don't know, solar systems that swim on people's private pools, that sort of stuff, there is only a very, very small part of the world's population that has a private pool, right? And so it's also thinking about basically the impact that this can have on um, society more broadly and on how many people. And even if it starts out as more of a luxury product in certain ways, whether that's B2B or B2C, what's the path to making it more accessible and actually um, creating the benefits, as broadly as possible.
I love that. Well, I guess to continue on that trend, do you have a question for Matthew from Voyager Ventures?
Yes, I would. With all of the happenings in mind, all of the news that we keep seeing out of the US and sort of the various reactions, I would love to hear a little bit about how he thinks about the values and how you defend the values in the way you invest, the way you interact with founders, the way you interact with the ecosystem.
Great, I love it. It's a tough question, but I'll ask Matthew. Well, look, we're getting towards the end of this episode. We have one last section, which is the fire questions. You will have one sentence maximum to answer those questions. We'll try to
Whew.
cover 5 in the next 5 minutes. Are you ready?
Yes, let's go.
Great. What's the biggest misconception about diverse founders?
That there are very few of them. It's not true. There are many.
Love that. What's an underrated climate solution that deserves more attention?
Water. Anything to do with actually recycling, preserving, using water more efficiently, because I think this is going to be one of our biggest problems.
I love that because it's an answer I've been hearing a lot from different VCs. So there's definitely something there. What's a red flag for you when looking at a startup?
From an impact perspective, maybe if impact is an afterthought, back to our t-shirts and planting trees example, when it really is something that sort of opportunistically got tagged onto the business to quote unquote make it impact.
If you had a magic one, what's one thing you would change about impact investing?
I would love for the entire ecosystem to start to start talking much more about success stories and how they're making their businesses successful, and stop debating whether impact can generate returns.
I love that. What's one piece of advice for an investor looking to finance inclusive climate tech solution?
And we already covered this. Let's co-invest.
Love that. What's one piece of advice for a founder building a company at the intersection of climate and social impacts?
Maybe, linked to the question, embrace your values. Find value-aligned investors, team members. You're probably onto something. So really, embrace the values and that out-of-the-box thinking.
What are the 3 most important things to be a successful impact VC?
I would say a great team internally and externally, so including the ecosystem, a strong vision of the world that we're building towards, and collaboration.
Super interesting. What's one resource like a podcast, a book, a movie, something that people should consume after this episode if they want to learn more about impact investing in social issues?
So there is a book called Earth for All. And I think the subtitle is something like a guide to saving the planet, which is based on the science around what actually drives positive impact, the levers, how we can make change. It's phenomenally well put together, and I'm a massive fan. So Earth for All, and maybe
Great, super.
the article that we just published on the VC funds that raised in 2024. If you need a little bit of positive news.
For sure, and I'll link to that in the description. I was actually planning on sharing the article in my LinkedIn in the next few days.
Aha.
Who's the next climate general partner that I should interview?
I'm sorry, I should have looked up who you have spoken to already, but someone from Planet A or a new, I think would be amazing.
Super. Yeah, I had Benedict from Planet A, but we can definitely find other people. And last but not least, where can people find you online if they want to reach out?
Yeah, so definitely on LinkedIn. Follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to the newsletter. We share on a regular basis opportunities for startups for funding, newly raised impact funds, and also startups to watch. And then to get in touch, also impactshakers.com. We have a form that also founders can use to get in touch with us. So yeah, those are the best ways.
Super. Well, listen, I've learned a lot from you today. I think it was very interesting to hear about your thesis in social and climate impact together and how that can create synergies, improve returns, improve defensive aspect of companies and trying to make them better and make them more resilient. I think that was very interesting. If you like this episode and if you like the show, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review and a comment and a follow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much, Alina.
Really nice speaking with you.